In the heart of the American capital, a disturbing act of violence has once again reopened the debate over crime, federal control, and institutional breakdown. Washington, District of Columbia, a symbol of American democracy, now finds itself trapped in a crisis of governance. A city that houses the nation's laws, seemingly unable to uphold them within its own boundaries. The latest spark, a brutal assault on a 19-year-old former employee of Doge, identified as Edward Corstein, publicly known by the pseudonym Big Balls. According to police reports, Corstein was violently attacked at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning in the Logan Circle neighborhood, just north of one of the city's most frequented dining corridors. The area, known for its popularity among residents and tourists alike, has now become the center of a national storm. Corstein had stepped in to assist a woman being carjacked. His intervention prevented the theft and likely saved the woman from further harm. But the consequence was immediate and severe. A group of minors turned on him, delivering what witnesses described as a merciless beating. The suspects, a 15-year-old male and a 15-year-old female, have since been arrested and charged with unarmed carjacking. The imagery that followed was grim and undeniable. Bloodied pavement, a young man unconscious, the implications extending far beyond the crime scene. President Donald Trump responded with clarity and fury. His statement, delivered on the social platform X, was unequivocal. He described a capital city overwhelmed by juvenile violence, where local gangs comprised of adolescents aged 14 to 16 now dictate the terms of public safety. Trump's warning was stark. Either they are going to straighten their act out in terms of governance and protection, or we are going to have to federalize and run it the way it is supposed to be run. His language was not speculative, but strategic, a signal of potential escalation and a challenge to Mayor Muriel Bowser's administration. To understand the gravity of this threat, one must examine the underlying context. Washington, District of Columbia, is unique in its governance. Unlike any other American city, it lacks full self-rule. Congress holds the authority to override local decisions. Yet, for decades, a balance has been maintained between local autonomy and federal oversight. That balance now appears to be unraveling. This is not an isolated incident. The Corstein assault is the latest in a series of violent crimes involving juveniles in the nation's capital. Earlier this year, a House staffer was carjacked at gunpoint in the Navy Yard district. In July, a congressional intern was caught in the crossfire of a drive-by shooting. The repetition of these events, all within proximity to the legislative nerve center of the United States, is not coincidence. It reflects a systemic breakdown in urban enforcement. Trump's proposed response, federalization, is not without precedent. In the past, presidents have considered or enacted temporary takeovers of local law enforcement under extraordinary circumstances. But what makes this moment different is that the call is not coming from local leaders overwhelmed by crisis, but from a head of state declaring the city ungovernable by its own standards. At the center of this storm, Corstein's actions have taken on symbolic weight. Elon Musk, the tech magnate and current owner of Platform X, stated that Corstein had acted heroically. According to Musk, Corstein confronted nearly a dozen young men attempting to assault a woman inside her car. His intervention left him concussed, but the woman was spared. Musk's conclusion, echoed Trump's, was blunt. It is time to federalize D.C. This convergence of media narrative, technological influence, and presidential authority forms a potent force. It raises uncomfortable questions about the state of the Union's capital. If Washington, District of Columbia, the showcase of American power, cannot protect its residents from juvenile crime, What message does that send to the rest of the country? The public safety issue is compounded by judicial inertia. Juvenile suspects, even in cases involving serious bodily harm or weapons, are often released or given minimal sentences. The argument in favor of leniency, that young people can be rehabilitated, has clashed directly with the reality of rising recidivism. Trump, in response, has floated the policy of prosecuting gang members over the age of 14 as adults. The proposal is controversial, but aligned with a broader trend towards zero tolerance in conservative-led jurisdictions. Within this dynamic, Washington's mayoral leadership is under pressure. Mayor Muriel Bowser, long resistant to outside intervention, is now being asked to explain how a city under federal shadow could fall so deeply into violent disorder. Critics argue that her administration has failed to enforce deterrent-based policing. Others claim that the issue lies not in enforcement, but in a judicial culture that refuses to hold juveniles accountable. Simultaneously, the national discussion shifts to other cities facing similar ideological crossroads. New York City, for example, under Mayor Eric Adams, has reported a decline in major crime categories. Murder down 26%, robbery down nearly 12%, shooting incidents down 21%. Adams, a former law enforcement officer, has walked the narrow line between public safety and civil liberties. His record, though not perfect, is becoming the benchmark for pragmatic policing in urban centers. But the gains in New York may be fragile. Adams is currently facing political opposition from Zoran Mamdani, a candidate formerly aligned with the defund the police movement. Though he now claims to have pivoted toward more moderate rhetoric, the memory of anti-police activism lingers. The New York Post editorial board has warned that should Mamdani take office, the criminal tide could reverse overnight. Not because of lawlessness on the street, but because of lawlessness in policy. The battle lines are thus not confined to Washington, D.C. They stretch across cities like Seattle, where activist Katie Wilson has advanced in the mayoral race. Wilson's platform calls for Trump-proofing the city, universal housing, non-police crisis response, and defiance of federal immigration enforcement. Her agenda mirrors the ideological conflict taking place nationwide, where progressive municipalities resist central authority and conservative actors warn of strategic collapse. The federal system, by design, was never meant to tolerate such sustained fragmentation. Law enforcement is a local responsibility, but national security is not. When local failure threatens federal functionality, the question arises, who owns the capital? Trump's rhetoric is not merely about crime. It is about power. It is about whether the federal government should intervene when its own seat of power becomes compromised. His call for federalization echoes historical moments of domestic disorder, from the desegregation crises of the 1950s to the National Guard deployments in the 1960s. But unlike those moments, the threat now comes not from mass protests, but from juvenile gangs, emboldened by institutional paralysis. Supporters of Trump's position argue that the risk is systemic, that if D.C. cannot be secured, the message to foreign adversaries is clear. The United States cannot maintain order within its own capital. Detractors, however, fear the implications of federal overreach. They argue that deploying federal control sets a precedent that could be abused not to restore order, but to suppress local will. This conflict, like so many in American governance, rests at the fault line between liberty and authority, between rehabilitation and punishment, between symbolic leadership and operational control. Corstein's beating, the blood on the pavement of Logan Circle, may be the flashpoint, but the real crisis lies beneath. A nation must ask itself, at what point does protection of the citizen override the autonomy of the local government? How many more carjackings, assaults, murders must take place before a threshold is crossed? And when it is crossed, who is held accountable? If Washington District of Columbia is allowed to fail at the level of basic law enforcement, then what remains of its symbolic power? How can Congress legislate national security when its own city is overrun with juvenile crime? How can federal judges interpret justice when it cannot be enacted 3 blocks from their courthouse? The debate now transcends party lines. It cuts into the very structure of American federalism. Trump's position, though political, is forcing the issue into the national spotlight. And if the city does not respond with measurable improvement, federal intervention may shift from possibility to inevitability. In the meantime, cities across the nation are watching closely. From Minneapolis to Seattle, from Chicago to Philadelphia, the same trends are playing out. Progressive policies clashing with rising public fear, judicial reform meeting practical resistance, ideological purity tested against tactical necessity. The cold logic is this: a nation cannot project strength abroad if it is hemorrhaging security at home. The role of governance, first and foremost, is the preservation of order. All liberties flow from that basic premise. Without it, liberty becomes illusion. Washington, District of Columbia, is not merely a city, it is a symbol. And symbols, once broken, are difficult to restore. What happens next will be watched not just by voters, not just by politicians, but by rivals and allies around the world.